A very good evening to our viewers, and thank you for joining us tonight on the agenda. My name is Toiwanje Bella, your host. Tonight we are discussing, of course, the issue of the Supreme Court judgment that came out earlier in the week on Tuesday, allowing the recognition of same-sex marriages conducted outside the country, but those that involve Namibian citizens or spouses. And to help us unpack the subject tonight is Dr. Shirley Magazi. She is chairperson of the Christian Coalition of Churches in Namibia. They have been pretty vocal on these related matters for many, many years, and of course we want to tap from their thinking as far as this issue is concerned. I think I must just state from the very beginning that we had invited a guest from the gay community that is obviously affected in a positive way by this ruling, but that guest did not pitch for one reason or the other. So it will be a one-way street in some way, but we have tried our best. Doc, it's always a pleasure talking to you. You've been here before, but thank you for coming back to the platform.
Thank you, Toivo, for having me again.
Yeah,
and I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion.
Yeah, wonderful. Yes, I think for the sake of our viewers, if you can just tell us first what the Christian Coalition of Churches in Namibia is.
Mm-hmm. The Christian Coalition of Churches is an organization that stands for the protection and preservation of morality and decency in our country, upholding the integrity and defending the integrity of our constitution, and also protecting the sovereignty of the nation as a sovereign country or nation from imperialistic pressure, and also ensuring that any law reform, policy making, or law-making process, that it is within the confines of decency, ethics, and morality. And so this organization stands to empower, particularly the church and church leaders, on the understanding of their role in the lawmaking process, and their democratic right in participating in this process. And in so doing, we then also engage different community leaders and traditional authorities and the public at large for them to understand that the democracy demands of them, the democratic right demands of them an understanding of the Constitution and their participation in lawmaking, ensuring that we are able to influence the direction of our nation from a biblical viewpoint in terms of our values to be upheld and morality to be upheld.
You spoke about the biblical perspective there, and I mean, the argument has always been that the country is how do you call
secular?
It? Secular state, meaning that we are not aligned to any particular religious orientation. So for non-Christians, or for, I don't know if there's such thing as non-binary in religion, those who do not believe in those, how do we deal with their plight?
You see, the beautiful thing about biblical values is also entrenched in our cultural values. And so it's basically just the source that you're using. But generally, when you look at the Namibian people, we have these values, whether they come from the Bible, whether it is from our culture, they're more or less the same. It's just that we're using the Bible as the authority upon which we base our values. And so for those that are not Christians, we invite them and again also empower them to speak out. Because if there's one thing that there is commonality is amongst different religions, it's when it comes to values and morals. There we are all on the same page. Speak of an atheist that perhaps does not believe in God. If they have their values that are from the culture and it speaks to and aligns to the values that we are promoting, why not? It's just that the source of our values and our advocacy comes from the authority. And the fact that we are a secular nation, and this has really been misunderstood, the fact that we are a secular nation does not mean that our principles, our values, our morality should not be informed by the Bible or Christianity or any religion. It only means that there is separation between the state and the church, or the state and religion, but it doesn't mean that we are a religious-free nation. It does not mean that you cannot practice your religion. It also does not mean, if your values are informed by your Christian belief, that you cannot use those values to influence decision-making and the process of law. Because everyone's values is informed by something. Why discriminate when it is from the religious point of view?
I understand. The coalition's position on the ruling of the Supreme Court, what are you guys saying?
What a disappointment, Toivo. Disappointment, not necessarily in the result thereof. Obviously, we all hoped that the result would be, the ruling would be to say we do not recognize same-sex marriages in Namibia, because that is what our constitution stands for, that is what our laws stand for. But more the disappointment is in the way, the manner in which it was done. When you read that judgment, it is very subjective and disguised as a judgment, but it's really subjective views. The sad thing is that our constitution has been undermined severely in the judgment. And the fact that our constitution has been undermined severely, and we've upheld other jurisdictions' constitutions, brings question in terms of, where is our judiciary? Are they not there to uphold and protect our constitution? And yet you come and uphold other jurisdictions' constitutions. That is a serious error. And from the coalition's point of view, this goes beyond us. It's the nation at large that needs to rise up with regard to this. And so, and I'm sure we will go into the same-sex part of it, but just generally looking at the ruling, looking in terms of what, how it was done, looking at the fact that we used in particular South Africa and Canada's constitutions, and two different constitutions from Namibia. If we look, for example, South Africa's constitution, and that was the basis upon which most of the ruling was made, South Africa's constitution is very liberal. Ours is conservative. And so the ruling really, I'm sure, in the legal sector, in the nation at large, legislators, all different organs of the state, it brings the country into disarray. The organ that is supposed to protect and ensure that the constitution is upheld by all means has disappointed the nation.
The judges, the four judges, of course, there's one dissenting judge, but the four seem to anchor their argument on the constitutional provision of equality. Of course, that one is provided for in our own jurisdiction, saying that we are equal before the law, and therefore, essentially, that's why the same-sex couple must enjoy the same privileges you and I as heterosexuals.
Very good. We are all equal before the law, but what was this case about? It wasn't about the personhood. It was about their preference, their sexual preference. That our constitution doesn't make provision for. There is no ground on in our constitution that provides a sexual orientation or same-sex marriage as an equal in our country. We are all equal as human beings and as persons. But when a person decides to act in criminal ways, and I'm going to take it from, let's just take criminal activities. For example, if a person decides that they want to practice robbery, how does the law deal with them? They're still equal before the law, but the law has an obligation to deal with the practice practice that they are employing, because that is a criminal act. The same applies in this issue as well. The people, the individuals are equal before the law. That's what our Constitution makes provision for. But our Constitution also upholds law. And to be lawful is to ensure that people abide by the law. And so because of that, it brings in differentiation in terms of our practices. And our practices are not all equal before the law. No. There is automatically a differentiation if your practices, your behavior does not align with the law. And that's the purpose of law. To guide us in our behaviors. And if our behaviors are not acceptable, then the law must take its act. And when the law does that, that doesn't mean that the individual is not equal before the law. Yes.
Did you, as the church community, as a coalition, see this coming? Were there any signals? Because this matter has been in court for ages, and there's been various rulings and appeals and whatnot. Is it something that you saw coming, or you were caught by surprise completely?
Not caught off by surprise at all. When we saw this coming, because we studied the High Court ruling upon which the appeal was made. And when you look, this error actually starts at the High Court. When you look at the High Court ruling, it was based on misinformation. And so that already pointed and gave us an indication that when it comes to the Supreme Court, most probably that is going to push as well. And when you see the two councils, the councils for government, and then the councils for the same-sex couple, they were not all on the same page. Unfortunately, and this is a reality that our nation must accept, that the council for the government failed the nation of Namibia. And the judges also recognized that he did not advance and strongly advance the position of the country, of the government, and he only relied on the frank case. And it gave room for the judges to act in the way that they acted. So having studied the High Court judgment and having followed the court proceedings, it was clear how this was going to turn up. And so we were ready for it. And that's why we are taking action.
It's interesting what you just said now. You are taking action. What action are you taking?
We are taking action. The action we are taking, and this started 3 months ago, is calling for a law. Because there was vacuum. You see, what Namibia has relied upon for all this time was the famous Frank case, the ruling that was made by Judge Olin, that was now overruled by the 4 judges. And so we relied on that, but then we never had legislation. And because of that vacuum, that we never had legislation that explicitly gives the stance of the Namibian people when it comes to homosexuality, LGBTQ, as well as same-sex marriages, that leaves room for things like this. And so 3 months ago already, we started mobilizing the people to say we need a law that explicitly says same-sex marriages in Namibia, funding thereof, promotion thereof, of all these LGBTQ promotions is prohibited. And that has started already 3 months. That's something we were never caught off by surprise. Now is the time to then officially submit it to our parliament.
How do I put it? So in the initial stages of our conversation, you spoke about decency, you spoke about moral uprightness. What is immoral and morally and not upright about same-sex marriages?
It takes us back to nature and that which is unnatural. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which way you would want to look at it, nature has a way of operation, what is natural. And the beauty of it is that you see it with human beings, you see it with animals, you see it in plantation, you see it within the whole entire ecosystem of the world. And it shows you the order of things. Now, when you look at other aspects beyond the human beings, you can see the natural application thereof. When it comes to human beings, we have gone beyond that which is natural. And what is wrong with same-sex couples or the practice thereof and all of it's an unnatural practice, no matter how we want to justify it, no matter how we want to explain it. Let's call a spade a spade. It is unnatural. And so it is because of the fact that it's unnatural that makes it wrong to start with, without even going further in other arguments. We just start with the natural part of it. And so as human beings, we are very intellectual. And so we cannot reduce ourselves to a state of confusion where we want to call unnatural practices natural practices. There must be truth and there must be order. And that is what we are promoting. We are promoting the natural order of things. That's the purpose of law. That's the purpose of natural law, to ensure that there is a decency and morality. And it stems from natural and unnatural practices.
Yeah. In your case, Doc, you are obviously a very learned person. You are well exposed, you are well educated. You preside over congregations that have diversity of personalities and people. What do you think anyone at all would engage in what you just called unnatural? Is it for the fun of it? Is it because they are really just that?
Thank you so much for that question. This is very close to my heart because when I was studying, I had a friend, a male friend, and we were in the same circles, in the same Christian circles. And he's been fighting the sexual attraction to fellow men for some years privately. And one day he came to me and he said, "Shirley, I can no longer. I have found a partner of the same sex and I'm going to go and continue." That's why this is very close to me, because I know the background. This person was abused at a young age by his uncle, never healed from it. And so, to a very large extent, these people have been abused. They come from brokenness. They need help. And we need to extend the help to them. And I'm not saying it's all of them, but a very good proportion of them come from abuse that has never healed, comes from disappointment. I had one of them come to my church as well, said and said, "I love the Lord. I'm married to the same sex and I'm not prepared to let it go." And when counsel, you again come back to the same issue, the abuse that has taken place. So if our society is really to help our people, it's not about a rights issue. It is about taking our people, embracing them, and then rehabilitating them, helping them deal with the ordeal and the trauma of the abuse that they have undergone, because you cannot correct a wrong with a wrong. And so help them overcome them. That's one. You have those that unfortunately, with the comprehensive sexuality education that is being taught in our schools, that is promoting this, and as much as Ministry of Education has tried to say it is not, we have shown them the evidence that it is the case. I, for example, had to remove my children from the life skills class because my kids were telling me I'm being taught things that is wrong and I don't want to listen to it. And in their engagement with their friends, kids came out of that class saying, you know what, I want to try this thing. I want to try this whole thing of homosexuality. And what are we doing to our children?
Yeah.
And so you have these ones where it is not from abuse, but it seems to be fun. You know, when kids are curious about something and they want to explore it, we are finding more of our children exploring this type of practice and damaging our children. And so you have those two where it is, where someone also then just decides, you know what? This is the pathway that I want to go. I feel attracted to that. And from a spiritual perspective, we know that the nature exists, yes, but there are forces behind it that influences that. And so we also know from a spiritual part of it, there is a demonic force that is influencing the behavior of people. And we have experienced it with people. I had, for example, of the people that are helping me say, you know what, one day I was sleeping and in my dream, I saw this figure coming up to me, but it's the same sex that came in my dream, and I felt aroused and developed a desire towards the same sex. So we know these things. These are not myths or mythical things. This is reality. And so you have different reasons why people decide that they would rather want to be engaged in the behavior or sexual preference of the same sex. And all in all, we need to help our people.
I hear you, Doc. We go for a quick break and then return with Dr. Shirley Magazi.
We are so excited to be kickstarting your morning with the entertainment.
Everything was happening during this past weekend.
Yes.
Exciting news.
Wow, no, she was killing it already.
In my opinion, I don't see anything wrong with him serving the full term.
As well as keeping you informed on the issues that you need to know happening in and around our country.
To another exciting episode of Pirongo Talk.
We bring jou liefst weer en vertel ook vir julle waar die vis heel moontlik kan byt.
The show continues with Dr. Shirley Magazi from the Coalition
Christian Coalition of Churches.
Thank you, Doctor. Wonderful. Yeah, so one thing that I don't understand is, you see that story that you shared, that very emotional story of an associate from your school days. We have a lot of people who, even here at home, who say that they are fighting off ages to those same-sex ages. Some of them seeking help, going through rigorous counseling and whatnot processes in order to really be saved from that. And then in the end, they just do not succeed. I mean, is it correct then to punish those people through our laws and say, yeah, because of what you have ended up being, that you're no longer part of us?
It's the same argument can be given by someone that has the urge of always stealing. And I had a cousin that had that from childhood. Everything was done to help him, but it continued to the point that it got so bad that in his young adulthood, it went too bad, got involved in the Daha issues and was now stealing at a big level, but it led now to murder.
Yeah.
If we are to apply that same analogy that you just gave, should we give up and just let him be? then it ends up with you going to the worst of what you had started with, then the law has to deal with you. The same applies when it comes to this. We need to look at it that not everyone has the expertise, and you can be a pastor, you can be a psychologist, you can be a counselor, you can be whatever.
Yeah.
Not everyone has the trained expertise to deal with this matter.
Yeah.
The same way that you have specialists in heart surgery, cancer, and so forth, the same also when it comes to counseling. Just simply because you have gone to a counselor doesn't mean that they have the expertise and the knowledge and the know-how to effectively deal and counsel people to be rehabilitated. And so that's the first thing we need to start with. Doesn't mean it's mere counseling that is able to help. It's specialized counseling that helps this type of thing. Secondly, just because someone cannot be rehabilitated doesn't mean that we need and condone that behavior at all. It then means that the person must deal with the consequences thereof. And that is again coming back to the purpose of law. Law is there to ensure that we abide by the set rules that society has agreed upon in terms of how we need to regulate behavior. You will always find those that are outside of that, and then they will have to face the consequences thereof. This type of issue, Toevo, is not one that you can go through 3-4 sessions and it's done. Because it's so deep-rooted, it's so complex. It requires to a very large extent the willingness of the person to really want to change. Like in any therapy, it requires that. And so you need the patients to be able to go through that. If you have not gone through it, then unfortunately the law will have to deal with you. Similarly, if you come to medical doctors and medical issues, they can try everything possible, but if a disease would not respond to the specific medication, to any treatment that it was given, what do? Then you will have to face the fate that is there. So you find that in all different disciplines. This is nothing peculiar.
Yeah. When you're speaking about the coalition working on a submission to Parliament, I find the timing very peculiar, because we have seen the courts already saying in previous rulings where same-sex couples have brought their cases to court and they were dismissed. They were dismissed simply to say, look, we do not have a legal tool to rely on in order to rule in your favor. But then they went on to make some sort of disclaimer to say, we now urge the country to really scrap the sodomy law and all these other laws to allow these people to also enjoy the love and life that heterosexual compatriots enjoy. As if there's a movement now towards that. So I'm thinking of how your submission would stop that process.
Toevo, when you look at that judgment, and I'm going to answer you just now, but let me say this because you brought up the sodomy law thing. That judgment said that there is no object that prohibits same-sex marriages. Our judges did not even consider the sodomy law as a possible, or not even a possible, as an instrument that prevents same-sex marriage. They overlooked this common law. What is it saying? Have they already decided that it is invalid, unconstitutional, without even declaring it first? These are the things that where our judges really just messed up. But that was a bye. Let's go back to what you asked. What needs to happen and what the nation needs to understand is separation of power. Separation of power, what has happened in the Supreme Court ruling that will become case law. That is the judiciary organ. We have the legislative organ. Article 81 of our Constitution says that a ruling by the Supreme Court will be binding on all courts, including the Supreme Court, unless the Supreme Court reverses it or it is contradicted by an act of Parliament. So we have this ruling, but it is not an act of Parliament. So the act of Parliament can contradict this ruling. That is what we are advocating for. To say this ruling does not reflect the aspirations, the values, the morals, the opinions of the Namibian people. We are guided. Article 1 of our Constitution says very clearly, all power is vested in the people. They are the sovereign of the nation. And so their views, their opinions must be upheld. Which is the route to go? Let's go to our legislators. We have voted them in. It's time that the Namibians participate in representative democracy by placing a demand on the representatives that they have elected in the parliament. Talks have always been that when a court, and especially the Supreme Court, has made a ruling, no one can do anything about it. That is the deception and lie that Namibia has been living under. And we are empowering even our legislators to know their power, that it's time to evoke Article 81. It is very clear the only thing that can contradict a Supreme Court ruling is if the Supreme Court itself overturns its ruling, as they have done with the Olin judgment that was made plus 20 years ago, or if the Act of Parliament contradicts it. And that is the route that the coalition is taking upon, and calling the Namibian people to support us in this, because this is democracy. This is what we voted our politicians into. Now they need to represent our views and our opinions.
That's a very, very important aspect that you just mentioned, because everybody actually believes that this is game over, that there's no recourse anywhere else. So thank you, Shirley, for bringing that up. The other thing is about, everybody's outraged. A lot of people are outraged, the majority obviously. And I've seen political parties like the Namibia Economic Freedom Fighters going as far as suggesting a referendum. And the counter-argument has been that the subjecting minority rights to majority rule is problematic. If you can engage me on your view on that.
First of all, we need to define a right. Is LGBTQ rights a right? No. That's the foundation. That's the start of it. What are rights? Who declares what is a right? And so that is not for an individual to come and just say, you know what? I have the right to steal. No. These rights are decided upon. These rights, member states decide upon fundamental rights. And member states in the world have come together and they have defined what are the fundamental rights. That's the departure point first. And so what we really should be asking is, should the preference of a smaller group of people be trumped by the voice of the majority? Yes or no? And based on our constitution, and I'm referring everything to our constitution, because that is the supreme law, that even case law, this very ruling, must align to. And according to our constitution has limited, Article 22, Section 2, has limited fundamental rights and freedoms, has limited to decency, morality, public order, public security, and so forth. So even in that, it brings in a limitation in terms of how far you can go with your preferences that you want to impose as rights. And even if you are to say that it is a right, it has limitations. And those limitations are clearly spelled out in our Constitution. The second thing is, what could have made this a right to our people is if our Constitution categorically said, like the South African Constitution, that this Constitution provides a ground of sexual orientation as a right to be protected, then yes, then we are all bound by it. It is absent. It is absent. Our Constitution is a conservative Constitution. It is very absent on that. And so we need to protect it. We need to uphold that. Does that mean that the majority should always overrule? And does it leave room for majority unbrittleness? No. The majority must be guided by the Constitution. The final say is the Constitution, Toivo. If the Constitution said, we recognize same-sex marriage, every one of us, majority or not, must be bound by that. So the balance that comes here in ensuring that the preferences of a smaller group, and I'm being very particular in my choice of words, and not calling them a minority. Why? Because our Constitution has outlined who are minority groups. Sexual preference is not a minority group. Again, we go back to our Constitution. It's ethnicity, race, religion, and so forth, clearly spelled out in our Constitution. So our choice of words is very important as well. People that engage in these behaviors, they're not a minority group in the sense of what a minority group is. They are perhaps a smaller group of people, because a minority group is a status. That is why we need to be very clear of it, and that status must be then protected. They don't have that status. They are a small group of people that have decided that this is our sexual preference and we want to advance it, we want it to be recognized, we want our practices to be recognized, and they want it to be imposed upon the majority. The Constitution, and what makes sure that such the smaller groups and minorities, in the real sense of minorities, if this, for example, was a religious group that has a minority status according to our Constitution, if, for example, if it was such a group, how do you protect such a group from the majority? And that is where the majority's opinions and aspirations and values and advancement must be subject to constitutional bounds. And so the Constitution is what brings this into order, to ensure everyone is protected.
Yeah. Sorry, Doc, if I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm wondering if you have, by any chance, had a chance to read the dissenting judgment or opinion of Judge Mainga in this particular ruling, and whether he based his dissent strictly on, because he cited some, I don't know, is it the Frank case? Or,
yes, the Frank case.
Yeah, whether it was simply for him a matter of law, or whether he raised, sorry, my English, whether he raised any issues around the cultural norms in the country, the morality, the decency.
Oh, we need to applaud Judge Mainga. It's unfortunate that he was the minority in this case. What Judge Mainga did was what the Supreme Court, all four judges, should have done. Judge Mainga followed judicial precedents, which is to ensure that a previous ruling is upheld, because it has so much consequences if you divert from that. And even in the event that Judge Olin's judgment was not the legal term is stare decisis, but if it was obiter, for example, if it was not part of the reasoning that forms the judgment and therefore should not be regarded as judicial precedents, then what he said, at least that should have, this court ruling should have then made it that. Yeah. Because the thing is, Toiva, rule of law requires that we follow what has already been established. Why? So that we can provide certainty to the society, and so that we can show the society how laws are formulated, how judgments are formulated, the reasoning behind it, so that when a similar case comes in, that is where equality comes in. And that's why we're saying this one did not have equality. So that when a similar case comes in, you don't treat the person based on your subjectivity, arbitration. You don't do that. You're not arbitrary in the situation, because that is what has happened with this one. You have standing rules, standing precedents that already then informs you on how to treat this person similarly to someone that was in a similar case also to be treated. This was not the case. Judge Mahinga also took into consideration our cultural values. He took into consideration what George Olin said, that our historical history needs to be considered, our social norms need to be considered, the background of the Namibians need to be considered in making such a decision, and it is outside the scope and power and jurisdiction of the judiciary to make such a decision, because that power by the Constitution has been vested to legislators, because the legislators are the representatives of the people's views and opinions, such that they are even guided by the Constitution, that as parliamentarians you must make decisions and laws based on public interest as well as your conscience. That is the organ responsible for it. So what Judge Mahinga really did was to say, let's give this, as the judiciary, our powers end here. This decision belongs to another organ, and that is the legislators. But no, he was overruled. Why? Because of other interests, I suppose. That is the only thing that we can reduce it to, because when you look at the judgment from a legal point of view as well, it is too flawed.
It's not sound.
No, it's not sound. I'm very sorry.
We go for the last break and then return for the last part of the show.
Welcome to What's Cooking, where culinary passion meets expert insights.
Somebody must really want to cook and want to cook good food.
Immerse yourself in the bustling world of professional kitchens as top chefs create mouthwatering dishes. Join us for in-depth interviews as our host explores the experiences and expertise of our guest chefs. Don't miss out. Tune in to What's Cooking on NTV every Friday at 2100 hours and let the culinary adventure begin.
Welcome to My.NA Cars, your ultimate destination for everything automotive.
I am your host, Diana Master.
Teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Discover the latest models, innovative technologies, and expert insights from our passionate hosts. Learn essential maintenance tips and get exclusive behind-the-scenes access to the automotive industry. Don't miss My.NA Cars on NTV every Thursday at 2100 hours. Tune in and ignite your passion for automobiles.
We are so excited to be kickstarting your morning with the entertainment.
Everything was happening during this past weekend.
Yes.
Exciting news.
Wow, no, she was killing it already.
In my opinion, I don't see anything wrong with him serving the full term.
As well as keeping you informed on the issues that you need to know happening in and around our country.
Welcome back. Doc, when you spoke earlier about many of these cases emerging from, backgrounds of abuse, for example, that a lot of these men, weight that involves men, of course, that a lot of them were abused. Isn't it supposed to be then the other way around? If you were abused in that manner, I thought that you ought to then hate that practice and engage in something else.
No, unfortunately not, because you must understand what abuse does to the mind and psychologically to the person. It really changes your fabric, your whole wiring. It creates a wound within you, and if you don't get help from it, you end up doing the very thing that you hate. That is why it becomes very pathological, and that's why it becomes a disorder. And it's interesting. Do you know that homosexuality many years ago was a mental psychological disorder, and it was pushed out of the American Psychological Association not to classify it as that, because your sexual orientation is not normal. But yet, when it is anorexia, for example, and this person has a view of themselves that they're fat, but they're so thin, it's still a disorder. It's still regarded a disorder, but it's a wrong perception that they have of themselves, and so we try by all means to help them, to rehabilitate them. But we apply different principles when it comes to someone that has a different sexual orientation of themselves. Yeah. Different principles being applied for the same thing. Yeah. You have a wrong perception. That is what it is. And so from basically to answer that, unfortunately, it has been proven throughout, what abuse does, it opens yourself up and it makes you vulnerable. If you have not gone through proper therapy to heal you from that, you end up doing the very thing that you hate. Yeah.
From a social point of view, Doc, we've seen, again, the reaction has been really, really huge. Political parties have come out, the ruling party. The Namibian Sun, Friday's edition, the front page is about the ruling party itself, saying that they do not condone the judgment, and they seem to hammer on the same point as you yourself, on the legal part of it, not very much the moral and decency, but they seem to suggest that they feel that laws and precedents from other jurisdictions have been brought into the country to just appease this couple.
Yeah. You see, the Constitution, the principle, one of the principles of the Constitution amongst democracy and justice for all is the rule of law, Article 1 of our Constitution. The rule of law demands that the law is upheld, the Constitution is upheld, not the Constitution of others. So, for example, the rule of law in South Africa would be differently applied as in the rule of law in Namibia. Why? Because the South Africans have an obligation to uphold their constitution. Yeah. That's a rule of law there. In Namibia, departure point, rule of law requires that we uphold our Namibian constitution. Now, the very judiciary entrusted by our constitution to ensure the rule of law failed us. That's the problem. Toivo, this is a big problem. This is beyond same-sex. This brings into question our judiciary system. Are they impartial and neutral as the Constitution demands them to be? It brings in now serious questions. And that is why the Namibians must stand up. I'm not surprised that even the SWAPO party, the ruling party, that one can argue to say is their judiciary. Yeah. You know how people can do it. I'm just throwing it out there. Even they themselves are affected by this. Yeah. Because a serious principle of our Constitution has been violated. Yeah. That has serious ramifications, serious consequences, and we cannot keep quiet as a nation. We have to speak up, we have to speak out, we have to do it timelessly and now. We must bring correction to this error that has happened, and it brings into why our constitution says that we must uphold rule of law, because rule of law is supposed to bring certainty. What has this ruling brought? It has brought uncertainty.
Yeah.
Even within the legal fraternity. It has brought uncertainty. What do we do now? There's a sodomy case that will be coming up. What do you do? Was this carefully plotted to make way for the sodomy one to say, now there's a new president, a judicial president, use this to nullify a sodomy law?
Because a sodomy law now cannot stand anymore under the circumstances.
Do you see?
Yeah.
But yes, it can. We've got different sources of law. This ruling of the Supreme Court is but just a case law. The sodomy one is common law.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
We have the customary law. Then we have the legislative, statutory law. And then we have the Constitution. And the Constitution should guide it all. And the fact that our Supreme Court overlooked our sodomy law is a very serious concern, because that law has not been made or declared unconstitutional. And it can only be declared unconstitutional if it is in conflict with the Constitution. Our judges, our honorable judges, the 4 judges, I don't know if they were trying to be smart, but they stayed away from declaring that act that was being questioned and challenged, from declaring it unconstitutional. Why? Because our Constitution is very clear. When Article 25 and 22, when a court declares a law unconstitutional, you need to send it back to the legislators to amend or to come up with a new law.
Yeah.
Clearly avoiding legislators. So you can see that this ruling was undermining and intimidating our legislators, subverting them from rising up. Even in the ruling, you would read to say that even if legislators are to come up with views of the people and think, the court still has the final say. No, that is South Africa, not in Namibia.
Yeah.
Not in Namibia. In South Africa, it's very clear. It's in their constitution. The Constitutional Court has the final say. In Namibia, Article 81 is very clear. The buck doesn't stop with the Supreme Court. This is unfortunately what our judges have tried to make us believe and intimidate our legislators. Was it intentional, purposeful? We will not know. But clearly, the strategy has backfired. Question that people are asking, and that I would also ask, has our judiciary been hijacked?
Mm-hmm. I hear you. I hear you. So the fact of the matter now, Doc, is that the reality really is that we have homosexual people in our midst. They have existed, I don't know, since time immemorial, and they'll be here for the remainder of our existence. How are we supposed to treat them? How are we supposed to deal with that reality?
Homosexuality stems back from biblical times. The origin thereof we find in the book of Romans chapter 1, that people disobeyed the rule of God in terms of how to behave, and the Lord gave them up to their own passions. It's very clear. And in their own passions to have this type of relations, attractions towards each other. It therefore stands to reason it will continue. It will exist forever. How do we deal, and this is what I would want to bring out, how do we deal with people that break the law? They will always be there. Despite the fact that we have a law that says theft is a criminal act, is an offense in our country, murder, manslaughter, whatever, gender-based violence, it is there. We cannot eradicate them, and that's not the purpose. We have to live in harmony with them without them imposing and condoning that which they are doing. So we have always lived with them. They've always been here. We have never discriminated against them. They have not proven in any court any discrimination against them. As Namibians, we've been very tolerant. We've never gone out in what they call homophobic ways to go and terrorize them. No, we haven't done that. Namibians have always tolerated those that are different from them. We continue to do the same. If you are going to practice what you are practicing in private, that's your private matter, not a national issue. We need to protect the nation from that, from further spreading this type of behavior by coming out clear with legislation that speaks directly to that. Should we follow the Ugandan route? I don't think so. Uganda has come up with very strong punitive measures. The church is here to love people. The church is here to rehabilitate people. The church is here to care for people. Let's care for this community. Let's support them as much as possible without condoning what they are doing.
Yeah. Doc, it was a pleasure having you on the platform tonight.
Thank you so much, Toiwa, for having me. And Namibia, this is our time to rise up.
Absolutely. That's Dr. Shirley Magazi, of course, sharing with us her perspectives and the perspectives of the coalition that she represents on the judgment issued by the Supreme Court last Tuesday on same-sex marriages. Thank you for watching.